At the very top of that cone there, you have a magnet. Now, if you see on my display there, you'll see about the size of magnet that he had there. And this magnet was attached to the upper cone. On the very top of that 45-gallon drum, what he had there is a cap or the lid, and attached to that another magnet of the same size, repelling this one here. Now, David had people coming over, and also people from universities, and saying, well, look, David, it looks like you got something here. He couldn't explain it, but they said, well, it looks like you got something. David looked at this compared to the ship he was in. He says, this thing is never going to work. I know how to do it, but it's never going to work, because he didn't understand what the principle was. Remember, he's a carpenter. He's not a technology person. So he puts it all together, puts the cap on top, and he says, well, obviously it's not working. Goes to bed. 2 o'clock in the morning, his wife Nora wakes up. David, fire in the house. David looks up in the garage, and what he sees is huge glow of red light. Rushes in the garage, and then what he sees there, he says, Pierre, the glow of red light would actually come up on the outside right there. And he says this thing was absolutely red, but it didn't look hot, it looked just red. He says as that happened, he says the inside part of this thing just rose right in the air and went right through the ceiling. So, funny enough, I've met someone that I did not know about, and David did not know about, that actually visited David the day after in the morning and actually witnessed the shingles on top of the roof in the little garage where this machine was broken off and the machine apart. Now we're going to move on to the next slide. This was the first prototype. Second prototype. David thought, well, it's a bit dangerous to keep it in the garage. I might as well build it on something that I can take out of the garage. When I'm finished working, I'll put back in the garage. So he built it on a trailer. What you see there, and this is an actual frame section of that is actually sitting on top of the trailer. Now, this is 8 feet in diameter, and this is plywood with magnets from Radio Shack, 1 inch in diameter, with the hole in the center, nailed down so they can be fastened to the plywood. So he would put all the magnets in the same direction, that means all the north or south poles facing in the same direction, and then he would stack them all around it, so it forms a ring of magnet. In the very center, you have a bowling ball. Now, underneath the bowling ball, you have a cup, so that the bowling ball can rotate and wobble. Now, the first part base of the machine is done. Let's move on to the next slide. Second part of this machine is the first disc that goes on top. This disc here also have magnets repelling all in, with their field, all in the same direction, and with the little hole there that will accept this little cup there, which is inverted and pushes on the bowling ball that you just saw. So when it's fastened to that 8 feet in diameter piece of plywood, then it basically floats on top of the magnetic field that you saw underneath. It floats on top of it and keeps it in balance. Now, if you push in any direction, it wants to wobble. That's basically what it wants to do. So this is the second part of the machine. Now let's move on to the next slide. This is the outer shell of that ship, because they had told him that it's extremely important that the ship or the machine that he built had an actual body, that the energy inside has a chance to reach a threshold, and then the energy then can mount and starts to show up around the device. So this wall here was very important because he wanted to keep the energy inside so that eventually it would just break the threshold and come out of the device. You can see the tilting effect here, and these rods, which will accept now the upper part of the device, and these magnets here will repel underneath the upper part that will go on top. So now we have the base, we have the first piece, which is this one here, and then we have a third piece, which is the actual part that sits on top of this, which has another ball as well, so that the upper, smaller part kind of wobbles as well. So now we have 2 wobbling discs. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. This is the upper part of the big one that you just saw there at the base. This one here also floats on that base. These rods that you saw is basically attaching the cone on the very top so that the parts inside that cone can wobble, and there can be an actual inflow of air between these cones. Now, inflow of air between the cones. What I'm trying to explain is that if you take a piece of paper on a table and you let it go, a cushion of air will place itself between the paper and the table, and the piece of paper will fly on the table as long as the cushion of air is there and the piece of paper is moving forward. What happens here is that the idea behind this machine was that by putting these cones on top of each other like so, the air would have a chance to flow between the cones. And because the cones are offset, the offset movement would help the air to cause a turbine-like motion inside, like a twirling motion. Let's move on to the next slide. This is a side view of that machine. You can see the trailer there, the wheels, the sidewall, and then the cap. And this is so that you can extend the wall here and cover the machine. The very top of this machine there, you have rings of magnets which centralize this wobbling motion inside. Now, an interesting fact about this machine is the kids would come over on the weekends and they would grab the top of the machine, which you will see a little bit later, and every time they would do that, cars in the street would stop, or TVs would start to go bad, and poles in the transformer would explode. So the first thing David would do is rush outside and say, well, you kids, stop playing with the machine. Now let's move on to the next slide. I can show you the actual part they moved. At the very top there, inside that little can, which was there actually just so that the water doesn't go inside the machine, is a little shaft, and that little shaft is an actual center part of that machine. So when you move that shaft, everything inside starts to wobble because it's all floating onto a magnetic field. Now, you've heard me talking about wobbling, magnetic field, repulsion of magnetic fields, and so forth. The idea behind all of this is that if you take two magnets that oppose each other and you move them like so. So if I take two magnets, this is magnet A and magnet B, and they put them on top of each other and they repel. So south and south, north and north. Now they repel. If I just do this, nothing will happen whatsoever. But if I start moving these magnets like this in a repulsion mode, and I enclose this movement into some type of a shell, suddenly a secondary field, which is called electrogravitational, which is kind of gravitational field, will start to show up for some reason. We'll move on to the next slide. These pictures are very rare. The fact is that this was a third prototype that David had built. Knowing that the one in the trailer wouldn't go anywhere but kept stopping the cars and doing all these unusual effects, he said, well, what if I perfection the movement and I make it more like the one I saw in the ship? So he does exactly the same thing, but this time instead of using a ball in the center, he would use magnetic just to support everything inside. So you'd have all your plates there supported now in a magnetic field, and to keep it in the center, instead of using a ball, he would use a ring of magnet on the outside to keep it centered so that all of this would be kept in the middle of the device. Now, this machine here is very important because this is one of the most unusual and drastic machine that he had built, and also one that produced the most unusual effects as well. Underneath there, what you see is so that nobody could see inside as he builds it. The very center, you can see the usual hole, and also underneath there are traps for air to flow in. What this machine is made out, again, round magnets from Radio Shack, scrap metal from aluminum scrap yard, and David didn't have any money, so that's all he had to build it, but he didn't need any more. He didn't need coils, didn't need wires, or didn't need experience. All he needed is to duplicate what he had seen. David built this one here, 500 pounds, 8 feet in diameter, and then puts the cap on top. Remember the 45-gallon drum with the cap lid on top with the magnet opposing? Same thing. Puts the magnet inside the cap here, the lid, puts it on top, 1977, 11 o'clock at night. Puts the screw on it. Now you can see that this is fairly high, it's about 10 feet high, so he's had this wooden ladder, puts the screw on it. As he looks down on the machine, because he needs to look down to put the screws on, the machine starts changing color. He says, whoa, something's going on here. So as that happens, he says, I rush down the ladder, run in the house, but in the house now all the lights are turned off because the machine, every time it starts doing its effects, lights and electricity seems to be disturbed around. Rushes in the house, grabs his Brownie camera, one of those little Kodak Brownie camera, black and white, and then starts shooting the pictures. But before we move on to the pictures, I'll show you a close-up of this machine. This is a close-up of the machine. As you can see, the air can flow right in that opening here. And these rings there have magnets inside. So basically, you take a round pipe, puts magnet in it, and then crosses the pipe so that it gets flattened, and then puts it into a jig so you can form it into a ring that would sit on the top of the machine there. That's the lid that I was talking about, that he put on top of the machine. And then the part that actually left from this machine is everything that is inside this wall here, which was the actual machine itself. Anything that's inside of it is the thing that actually left in 1977 at 11 o'clock at night. Now David rushes outside and starts shooting pictures. Those are the series of pictures that he shot. There's no need to stop on this one except on the last one. We'll pause here for a while. Okay. Now look at this picture here. I think that this is one of the drastic pictures that we have from this machine. Again, the lighting effect, the photon emanation from the machine, the unusual bright light that we get. UFOs, bright light, cars stopping. Remember all these effects? Well, same thing here. Also, the seemingly flow of these effects into the machine, as you can see there. Now, David sees that, and he's not flabbergasted because he had this incredible technology. He was actually mad because he lost his magnets. That's the way David was. So David rushes out to the airport, to the phone, calls the airport, says, can you see it? Can you see it on your radar? Because as this thing lifts off in the sky on Maple Ridge, it goes towards the west over the sea. Calls the airport, says, well, can you see it? And of course, it wasn't in the radar window, so couldn't see it. Okay, so lose the object, never comes back. And of course, he didn't think of putting a system inside so he could stop the object. We'll move on to the next slide. Explaining details in the book. It's very, very interesting. But this is to explain what actually showed up in the house for absolutely no reason. But it was told to her that these leaves were there to help her so she can heal herself. Let's move on to the next slide. We have a close-up of this one. That's a close-up of the leaf. It's about 1 millimeter long, and the bud, And this is Nora and David today. Now we're going to pause here at this slide, and David is still alive today, still takes care of his wife, and David is also working with me in recreating a prototype which should be finished at the end of December, and the same prototype as the last one that you saw that left. What I did is I said, well, okay, it's a wonderful story, it's got a lot of guts and things like that, but is there anything in the world right now that's correlating to the information that he